Kesubos Daf Lamed a test contains one Mishnah from the beginning of the Daf until the Mishnah. We've already seen part of the sugya. We're going to go over now the Gemara's sources and proof that a Nara who died cannot possibly have children. The Gemara is going to explain how we know that. And the Gemara will then bring two more shilas relative to what happens in a situation where a Nara was nisanes. How is it possible? Is there a possibility that she gets to keep her own kanas instead of it going to her father? We'll then get to the Mishnah. The Mishnah will introduce a comparing and contrasting of the two types of kanas, that of onus and that of mafata. The Mishnah will show the differences between them, and the Gemara will analyze those differences one by one. So let's begin. The Gemara has previously been discussing situations in which a girl who was nisanes gets to keep her own kanas. We said if she becomes a bogeres, so she outgrows the stage of naros, she reaches the age of 12 and a half, before her court case, the court case against her attacker begins, then she gets to keep her own kanas. Her father only gets the kanas if she's a nara at the time that the attack happened and at the time that she goes to court. The Gemara discussed what happens if she was nisares, she had erison to someone, and she was divorced. Minha erison, does she keep her own kanas? Now the Gemara discussed what happens if she dies. And the question there was, what do you mean? Who's going to keep the kanas? She died. So the Gemara had said, well, maybe it goes to her son. So the Gemara now is proving that it's impossible for a nara, who's a girl who was 12 and a half, who died as a nara, impossible for her to have a son. So the Gemara goes through, the Gemara quotes Rav Bibi, who brought a brisa to Rav Nachman. There are three types of women that are allowed to use contraception. Generally, it's forbidden to use contraception. It's considered to be hashchasas zara. But a nursing woman is allowed to, lest she become pregnant and her milk get lost, and therefore it'll result in illness or the death of her child. A woman who's pregnant already is allowed to use contraception lest she get pregnant again, and this turn the child that she's already carrying into a sandal. Rashi says that's a type of a fish. That's a malformation that happens to the child she already has. And the one we're going to focus on is a ketana. That's a machlokas between Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim. Rabbi Meir said they all agree that from age 11 and under, she doesn't need contraception because she can't physically get pregnant. From age 11 to 12 is a machlokas. Rabbi Meir says she can't get pregnant because if she will die, which the Gemara's, for our purposes, means she can't have a living child and live. The Chachamim say she doesn't use contraception. You're right, she could die, but Hashem will take care of those people who do foolish things. Where we apply that and when we apply that is a different sugya. Now, the Gemara therefore says, so you see clearly that from age up until age 12, it is impossible for her to conceive, live, and bear a living child. Now, from age 12 to 12 and a half, she can. However, she couldn't possibly have given birth and have died herself before she becomes a bogeres, because a pregnancy has to be a minimum of 7 months. It cannot be 6 months, and naros is always up to 6 months. It cannot be more than 6 months. Shmuel says that even though naros doesn't necessarily begin when she turns 12, it could begin when she gets 2 saras or other physical symptoms. It always ends 6 months later. So it cannot be more than 6 months, and therefore she can't possibly have a living child. She can't possibly conceive when she's already a naira. She can't conceive earlier. She can't conceive when she's a naira and give birth while she's still a naira. Impossible. The pregnancy lasts too long. And this woman, we're saying she died while she was still a naira and she has a kid. So the Gemara therefore says that's not possible. And the Gemara answers the question we had really asked was different than that. There was two versions of that, as we saw in our discussion in the last daf. Now the Gemara has a different child. The Gemara says, what happens if she actually gets engaged and she stays engaged at the time that a court case comes up? That is, she was a nara, she was single, she was nisanes, then she got engaged, and while she's still engaged, her court case comes up. Does the fact that she's an arusa now take away her father's knas, and she gets to keep her own knas? So the Gemara says this question was asked from Rava to Abaye, and Abaye answered, there's nothing wrong with that. It doesn't say that it's asher lo arusa. It doesn't say that we're talking about a nara who's not engaged. It says Ashalo Orasa, who was not engaged at the time that it happened. She's engaged now. There's nothing in the parsha that says the parsha doesn't apply to her. Therefore, it fully does apply to her, and therefore the knas goes to her father. Said Rava, based on that logic, the same thing could be true if she was married. It doesn't say that she's a nara who's not married. It doesn't say Ashalo Nesua. So it just has to be that at the time of the incident, she was single, but she could be married now, and the knas should still go to her father. And that's, we know, is not true. It's the brisa that says that if she's married, the knas goes to her. If it's awarded, it doesn't go to her father. So how could you tell me this logic of it doesn't say that she is engaged now? It doesn't say that she's married now, that she's not married now, that she's not engaged, and that she's not married. So Abaye answers, he says it's very different. Marriage is just like the bagros. Marriage is just like reaching the age of 12 and a half. Both of them take a woman out of her father's rishus. Specifically, as far as Hafaras Nadarim, he no longer has the ability to cancel her vows. The turning 12 and a half takes away his right to do that, as well as marriage at any age takes away his right to be able to do that. Therefore, those two things are the same, and therefore being an Asua is considered to be like becoming a Bulgaris. Being an Arusa does not take that away. While she's an Arusa, her father and her husband both have the right to cancel her vows, and therefore it doesn't count as Bagros, and you can't compare the two. All right, this concludes the Gemara's discussion about a Nara who was an Arusa or an Asua. Now we get to our next Mishnah. The Mishnah compares and contrasts an Anusa and a Mafuta. Anusa is a man who rapes a woman. Anusa is that he seduces her and she willingly participates. Still, he's held responsible. The Torah, though, does not say that he has to marry her. So let's see the Mishnah lists three primary differences between an onus and a mefata. So first of all, as far as what items he has to pay her, so that's difference number one is that the onus has to pay 4 things and the mefata only has to pay 3 things. They both have to pay for her embarrassment that this happened to her, for the pagam that she's devalued, and the knas, which is specifically laid out. They both have to pay that. The difference is that the mefata does not have to pay for tsar. There is no tsar, there is no pain, no physical pain caused to her significantly, while the onus does cause her a significant physical pain. The Gemara will explain what that pain is. So this is difference number one. Difference number two is when they pay, the onus has to pay right away because the onus does not have an option of marrying her. The mefata only has to pay when the wording of the Mishnah is when he divorces her. The Gemara explains it's not that he divorces her, it's when he exercises the option of not marrying her because the mefata doesn't have to marry her. So when he sends her away, that is when he has to pay for all these things. If he marries her, he doesn't have to pay them because he's marrying her. Now, the third difference between an onus and mefata is this halacha that the onus has to marry her. The Mishnah phrases this as he has to drink from his cup. He made her his cup and therefore he has to drink from it. He's not allowed to divorce her under any circumstances other than the fact that she's ushered him. So if she is lame or she's blind or she's mukashchin, she's covered with all kinds of deformities, then in all those he cannot divorce her. He's still responsible to stay married to her. If, however, she does something inappropriate which disqualifies her for marriage, or she's not allowed to marry Yisrael, then he's not allowed to stay married to her because it says V'lo si le'isha. That's the phrasing of the pasuk that says he has to marry her. V'lo si le'isha, v'lo with a vav. She should be to him as a wife, but it's only le'isha hara'uyalo. It's only if she was fitting for him, not otherwise. All right, now the Gemara begins. The Gemara starts off by discussing what is the pain that he needs to pay her for. What pain is caused to the woman by the ma'anis? So the Gemara first brings Shmuel, who says when he forces her to the ground, she strikes the ground, and that hurts. So the Gemara asks, so what it would be if he didn't force her to the ground? What if he was ma'anis her on a very soft silk surface? So the Gemara says maybe he'll tell me that he doesn't have to pay for that. The Gemara says that can't be, because if Rabbi Shimon ben Yehuda says the name of Rabbi Shimon that an onus does not have to pay tzar, that is his opinion, is that an onus does not have to pay tzar, because she's going to get that pain anyway when she gets married. So the pain which she suffers is one she's going to have in any circumstance. It's not something that he's causing her more than she would otherwise ever have. So that's clearly not referring to striking the ground. Her husband's not going to throw her on the ground. What they must be referring to is the pain of the breaking of the psulim. Now they said to him, their response to him was the pain is different. The pain with her husband, where it's a willing bia, is a lot less than the pain when it's being forced. So therefore you cannot say she's going to have the pain anyway. But it clearly has nothing to do with the surface, because otherwise you cannot claim that she's going to have the same pain with her husband at some point in the future, and he's making that pain happen now instead of then. It's not true, because he's not. If it's about hitting the ground, she's not going to hit the ground with her husband. The Gemara therefore offers a different explanation as to what the pain is. The Gemara quotes Rabbi Bar Avuo, says it's the pain of the spreading of the legs. So the Gemara quotes a pasuk to support that there's the spreading of the legs is a significant thing. It's a pasuk in Cheskel criticizing Klal Yisrael. It says v'tefaski es reglayich v'chol oiver. So the Gemara's question is, if the problem is the spreading of the legs, why is it that only the victim of ones suffers that? The mafuta also suffers that, and the mafata should therefore have to pay that as well. She also has her legs spread. So the Gemara quotes Rav Rabba Bar Avua, who says that it's like somebody who says, rip my shirt and you won't need to pay for it. She's allowing him to do that. Even though she's going to suffer the pain, she cannot claim anything from him because she gave him permission. She willingly submitted. So Gemara asks, she does not have the right to be Meichel because that monetary value is her father's. Her father has the right to take Kesef Kedushin for her while she is an Ara, and the father is the one who collects the tsar, the damages. So she doesn't have a right to say, I'm Meichel that, and therefore the father should still collect that. So Gemara therefore says it must be that she has no pain. Mefuta does not suffer pain of spreading her legs. Gemara asks, well, we see that she does. So Gemara says, yeah, there's pain, but the pain is mild. And the Gemara quotes a number of Amoraim who said what their mother or their wife described the pain as. Abai said, my mother, this is referring to his stepmother, because Abai didn't know his mother. She died in childbirth. So she said it's like warm water on the head of a bald man. Rava said that his wife, who's the daughter of Rav Chizda, said it's like the knife of the butcher slipping into the flesh. That's not the cutting action that hurts. It's not being described as cutting living flesh, but the sound or the feeling of cutting the flesh that it is working on. Rav Papa said, my wife, who's the daughter of Abba Sirah, said that it's like dry bread being rubbed on the gums. The Gemara now moves on to discuss the next phrase in the Mishnah. We had said that the Mafata needs to pay only when he divorces her. The Gemara points out, as we said earlier, he doesn't divorce her because she's not married to him. It means when he decides not to marry her. The Mafata does not have to marry if he doesn't want to. The onus, he cannot choose not to. However, she or her father can choose not to. The Gemara quotes a brisa that makes all these points. The brisa says that a Mafata needs to pay boishes and pagam right away. Kanasi only has to pay when he decides not to marry her or when the decision is made not to marry her. As far as the mafata goes, the onus and the mafata, that is, she can choose not to, and her father can choose not to. In the case of the mafata, the attacker can also choose not to. Now, the Gemara wants to find the sources that both for onus and for mafata, both her and her father can choose not to go ahead with the marriage to the attacker. So the Gemara quotes a drasha by Mafuta, but the phrase there is im ma'in yema'in aviha, if ma'in yema'in, refuse he will refuse. So one is talking about her father, that's the simple shot here, and the other one is talking about her, she can refuse as well. Either of them can refuse the marriage. Now, how do you know that that's true by onus as well? So the Gemara says, what does it say by onus? It says, velo siya leisha, she should be to him, to a wife. That implies with her agreement. So that means that she can refuse because it says that she should be with her agreement. How do you know, however, that her father has a right to reject the marriage? So Abaye says one reason and Rava says another. Abaye says because otherwise the attackers would be gaining here. The Ma'anes would not have been able to marry this girl any other way because he has to give Kesef Kedushin to her father, and her father may not have agreed. So they make him up with a simple strategy. He'll say, I'll be Ma'anes her, and then the father no longer has any possibility of stopping me. It's only up to her, and I know that she won't stop me. So that would be, he would be gaining through his sin. The Gemara therefore says that, Abaye says, that can be that the father no longer has a right to stop him. Rava says it's a different shot. Rava says it's a kavachomer. The mafata, what did he do? He violated the father's will. He didn't violate the girl's will because he was mafata. She agreed. Okay, so the onus, he violated both of their wills. So it's a stronger crime. It's violating two wills. So if the father can choose to reject the marriage. In the case of the mefata, where only his will was violated, certainly the father can choose in the case where the crime violated both his and his daughter's will. Now, why did Abai and Rava not want to say like each other's pshat? So the Gemara says Rava didn't want to say like Abai because he holds it's not chot and iskar. He can't say that he's gaining from it. He has to pay knas. And therefore, although he may get one thing that he wanted, he gets something else, which is a punishment that's not exactly chotei niskar. Now, Abai didn't want to say like Rava because he has a problem with the kal v'chomer. The problem with the kal v'chomer is that it's a very simple reason why the father might not be able to do anything in the case of the onis. And that's because the attacker can't do anything. If the attacker has the right to say no, in the case of mafuta, there it could be that the father has the right to say no. But to say that in the case of the onis where the attacker doesn't have the right to say no, that the father also has the right to say no, not necessarily. The Gemara now quotes another brisa on the subject. The brisa says, even though the onus, the ma'anes, needs to pay her right away, he has to pay knas, tsar, boishes, and pagam right away at the time of the crime. Once he sends her away, once he divorces her, he doesn't have to pay her anything then. He doesn't have to pay her ksuba. She cannot say, okay, now we're married and now you're divorcing me, give me ksuba. Or if he dies, she doesn't get ksuba. The reason is because the money that she got for knas, that's her ksuba. She doesn't get another ksuba besides that. Now the Gemara interrupts and asks, how could he send her away? He's not allowed to. So the Gemara says, obviously referring to where she is leaving and she's requesting a get, and then he is allowed to comply and give her the get. So now the Gemara goes back to the brisa, and it's actually a machlokes. The Tanna Kama says she doesn't get any ksuba. Rabbi Yehuda says she does get a ksuba of 100. What's a machlokes based around? So the Rabbanan say the whole point of ksuba is that it should be difficult for him to send her away, because if it's free or cheap, then it'll be easy, and then she won't be confident in the marriage and won't have full gemir sadas. Therefore, we make ksuba so it should be a complicated and hard process. He'll have to think twice before he does it. This case, you don't need that because he can't send her away. The Torah says he's not allowed to. It's only if she asks for it. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says not too fast. He could still send her away, and that's if he makes life so difficult for her that she requests a divorce. Nothing that says he's not allowed to do that. To prevent that from happening, we still have to make a ksuba of some sort. So we make a ksuba of 100 instead of 200. At least you have that.